George Herbert, Affliction. Herbert wrote 5 poems with this title, and this is the 3rd of them. The poem is not on display in the exhibition. The exhibition was going to include the poem in a facsimile of a contemporary manuscript, but unfortunately there just wasn't enough room. I want to say a word first about this manuscript because its source is indicative about Herbert's religion in his time. The manuscript was written in the community of Little Gidding. This was a small Anglican family monastic community for men and women, headed by somebody called Nicholas Farrar. The community was established in 1626. Charles I took refuge there briefly after his defeat at Naseby, and it was sacked in the following year by parliamentary forces. Nicholas Farrar was a close friend of George Herbert's. Herbert entrusted him with the manuscript of his poems at his death in 1633, and Farrar arranged for their publication. Farrar had been ordained as a deacon in the Church of England by William Laud. Laud became Archbishop of Canterbury during the reign of Charles I, in fact in the year Herbert died, 1633, and he was executed during the Civil War in 1645. So the provenance of this manuscript shows something about Herbert's religious affiliations at the beginning of the period of conflict between the Crown and Parliament that led to the Civil War. The Little Gidding community is probably best known to readers of poetry through T.S. Eliot, the last of whose 4 quartets is named after it. Affliction begins from an exclamation, "Oh God!" Herbert then interprets this, and the argument of the poem shows him gradually extracting more and deeper meanings from it. The exclamation indicates to Herbert the presence of God in his sufferings, and that implies to him that the sufferings have a good purpose. They will be guided by God towards some sort of greater good. The rod with which the poet is beaten is a scepter showing God's kingly power. The poem's in 3 short stanzas. In the second, we hear that since the breath of life comes from God, the exhalation of breath heard in the opening exclamatory sigh, Herbert knows comes from God as well. But when a sigh is so full of suffering, he asks, what's then behind? What is its full meaning? Herbert here uses an idea from early modern physiology. If with the sigh some years escape, he says, referring to the belief that each time you expelled breath in a sigh, you diminished your vital strength and so shortened your life a little. One meaning of the exhalation of breath in his sigh is therefore that it is a gale to bring me to my bliss, that is, the bliss of heaven, to which the sigh has brought him nearer by hastening his death. The last stanza is about the sufferings of Christ. Herbert interprets the sufferings that have caused the poem's opening exclamation as showing the presence of Christ in individual Christians who are Christ's members, his limbs. Herbert reflects that Christians who think of the crucifixion simply as an historical event in the past underrate Christ's sacrifice. Christ dies every day by his participation in the sufferings of his followers on earth. So the poem ends by going back in a new way to the presence of God in human suffering that was evinced by the exhalation from which the poem began. Oh God. George Herbert, Affliction. My heart did heave, and there came forth, O God. By that I knew that thou wast in the grief, to guide and govern it to my relief, making a sceptre of the rod. Hadst thou not had thy part, sure the unruly sigh had broke my heart. But since thy breath gave me both life and shape, thou know'st my tallies. And when there's assigned so much breath to a sigh, what's then behind? Or if some years with it escape, the sigh then only is a gale to bring me sooner to my bliss. Thy life on earth was grief, and thou art still constant unto it, making it to be a point of honour now to grieve in me, and in thy members suffer ill. They who lament one cross, thou dying daily, praise thee to thy loss.